Here's something to ponder: the Affordable Care Act. Now notice, I didn't call it Obamacare. Let me tell you why. Calling it Obamacare immediately sets someone up for an argument. It's the same as if I went up to someone who was pro-choice and called them someone that's pro-abortion. You're immediately setting someone up for confrontation. So I believe that calling it Obamacare brings the rhetoric to a dangerous level and invites confrontation, argument, and partisanship. So, in this video at least, I'm going to call it the Affordable Care Act, and I'm going to do my best to do so in my daily life, and I encourage you to do so too. Because after all, you may believe incorrectly or correctly that someone who's pro-choice is pro-abortion, but it's not necessarily something you should say to their face because it's just not very nice. So here's my take on the Affordable Care Act. Now, I know it's not perfect. No law ever is. I'll be the first person to say that it's not perfect. And I'll be the first person to say that there are parts of it that President Obama and Democrats need to work with Republicans to change. For instance, the medical device tax. I may be in favor of it, or I may not be, but it is a contentious part of it, and I believe that the conversation about that needs to be had. Democrats need to be willing to talk about it, and Republicans need to accept that they need to come to a compromise about it, because odds are they're not going to repeal the whole medical device tax. It's not likely, but maybe they could agree to lower it from, I think, where it's at about 3.5% to maybe 2% or 1%. But that takes compromise. The question is, will young House Tea Party Republicans take that compromise for an answer? I don't have the answer to that question. Let's also talk about the employer mandate, which requires that firms start providing insurance in 2015 to companies with at least 50 full-time employees. But as of 2010, according to a CNN report, there were roughly 5.7 million small businesses in America, defined as those with fewer than 500 workers. 97% of those 5.7 million have fewer than 50 workers. So that means technically the employer mandate, this idea that if you have 50 employees you must provide insurance, is only going to apply to 3% of small businesses. Now, will the employer mandate kill jobs? I don't know. I mean, you could ask the same question about raising the minimum wage. But what I can say is that I think Republicans have made a big deal out of something that is only going to apply to 3% of businesses, which is only, out of that 5.7 million, what's that, 200,000 or 300,000 businesses? I mean, that's still a lot. But if you listen to Republicans talk about this employer mandate, you would think it applied to millions upon millions, 3 million, 4 million, 80%, 70%, 90% of businesses, and that's simply just not true. It's not true. Now let's talk about some of the positives of the Affordable Care Act. The interesting thing is that when people are polled on this act, so many people hate it. Well, first, a lot of them hate it. They don't know why they hate it. They just say, oh, it's going to kill jobs. Other than that, they don't really know why, which is unfortunate. If you believe something, you need to know why you believe it. Otherwise, quite frankly, when asked about it, you look like an idiot. But let's talk about some of the good parts. And the irony is that, as I said before, most people, the majority of people, don't like the Affordable Care Act. But they like certain provisions of it. which brings up the question, if Republicans, let's just say, even after House Republicans voted 42 times to repeal it, let's just say, for some crazy reason, that House Democrats agreed to repeal it, and the president, a Democrat, agreed to sign its repeal. Well, what would Republicans replace it with? I don't know, they haven't really said. But I'd be willing to bet you a few bucks, Monopoly money of course, that half of what they'd replace it with is already written into the current law. For instance, the idea that young Americans can stay on their parents' insurance plans. Because of Obamacare, kids can now stay on their parents' plans until the age of 26. And 3 in 4 Americans, 75% of Americans, support this part of the Affordable Care Act. Even 2/3 of Republicans. Another great part, the Affordable Care Act bans insurance companies from denying coverage for pre-existing conditions. Before the Affordable Care Act, if you were a woman, that was considered a pre-existing condition. If you're a diabetic, if you have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, you had cancer and you're a survivor, that is a pre-existing condition. And you would be able to be denied any insurance coverage because of those conditions, which 1 in 3, according to the American Diabetes Association, 1 in 3 Americans is either diabetic or pre-diabetic. So think about, without this act, how many people could be denied coverage. But let's also talk about other important parts of the act. The ideas that coverage cannot be taken away from you randomly at any point because you get sick while you do have insurance. The Affordable Care Act also takes away lifetime caps. So your insurance company could say, you know what, we already spent the maximum amount of money we wanted to spend on you, so we're not spending any more money on you. How about the idea that a certain percentage of money that the insurance company makes has to actually be spent on care for you? Those are all good ideas that I think the honest majority of good-hearted, common-sense, realistic Americans can support. Now, there's no death panel. Sarah Palin was wrong. Whether you like her or not, admit that she was wrong. It's ridiculous that there are some Republicans today still talking about these stupid death panels because it's just not true. Now, in closing, as I said before, the Affordable Care Act is not perfect. Let's work on it. Maybe Republicans should stop holding the government hostage and say, we've accepted that Obamacare is law. Now, I know they're not going to do that because of a million other reasons that would take me 10 minutes to talk about. But they need to accept, after a Supreme Court decision, after clear up or down votes in the House and Senate, after the president's signature, and after 2 elections and 49 failed attempts at repeal or defunding, and shutting down the government, and the irony is that the exchange is opened anyway, they need to accept that Obamacare is law, and they need to grow up, end this kindergarten classroom, and work with Democrats to make it better. Now maybe I'm an optimist, but they need to work to make it better. So that's my take on the Affordable Care Act. As of now, on a 1 to 10 scale, I'd probably give it a 6. You know, not every part of it is great, but there are many parts of it that are good, and I believe that the good in this case outweighs the bad. So what will I say to you? Keep pondering America, and keep asking the tough questions, and let's do this.